coming into. And like it looks like we're halfway there almost. Last time we talked about organizational transformations, and now we're talking a little about lean agile design and shared meanings. But let's go and see what you did last week. The pair exercises, reflections, learnings. I've gone over through all of them. And it's always nice to give compliments to people. So this week's compliments go to Kaisa. Kaisa, this was a really nice summary. I mean, it has a lot of content, it has a lot of thought, and it's not like pages and pages of analysis. So thank you. And for everybody else, if you had something similar, good for you. If you had something less or your reflections were missing altogether, then not so good for you. Then a couple of things I picked out from. So remember, and those of you who didn't do the exercise, it was the temporal onion. So the point being what has happened before the project and what will happen after the project is done. So a couple of quotes came up, a couple of points that I thought were really good. So one of you wrote, even though the project success metrics would have initially been set from the inside, they don't necessarily give the right picture if external impact is not taken into consideration. This tool helps in discussing with stakeholders in the project team. Yes, that was absolutely the point of the tool. And I think typically when we're running a project, whether it's big, small, personal work, we are very much focused on the project and kind of inside the scope. And this was really pushing you to look at the outside of it. And I think that was a good point made out about it. Another one wrote, I believe that this tool can be particularly helpful in the initial phases of a project when the objectives and implications are still unidentified. Exactly. And many of you actually made this point that this is actually probably really good when you're starting a project. Yes, this is really good because you're pushing yourself to think what actually is the bigger picture of the project. Another one, primary value of this exercise was not the timeline in itself, but the realization of how easily context collapses when ownership, agency, and perspective are missing. This was very insightful, very thoughtful comment that, that there is kind of different perspectives. I think some other you have also, or actually many of you pointed out that this actually shows all the stakeholders. This kind of brings the different perspectives and lenses that Jari talked about in the first lecture as well. Again, the whole context, the larger context really starts becoming active when you start asking questions around this tool. Then one of you wrote, the tool also clarifies what happens after the project officially ends, highlighting remaining tasks such as follow-up, monitoring, further development, as well as the need to assign responsibility for these. Excellent point. And remember, the point of the tool is primarily to think what happens after the project, once the project has been done. Because like we talked last time, and many of you wrote in the exercises, this really emphasizes that the success happens outside the project. And this also kind of highlights, stuff needs to happen, even though when the project ends, people, pack their bags and go home. What happens then? That's where the success happens. There are things to be done. There are things to, maybe another project starts. Okay, a couple of really points. It was interesting because actually many of you did not quite do what I asked to do in this exercise. Not a majority, but actually many of you. Many of you thought that this is a tool to design what happens inside the project. So many of you were like, okay, the first month of the project, the 6 months of the project, so this is, and then the project ends after 1 year. That was not the point. The point was that, let's not go inside the project, but let's facilitate the pair to think about what happens before the project or what has happened, and most importantly, what has happened after, outside the project. So this is not a tool, or the idea is not to design the actual project tasks, unless you think that once we understand the impacts, then definitely that should shape how you design inside the project. But this tool was really to clarify the outside of the project in a timeline. And the point I wrote there is you have to jump outside the project to start seeing the larger context, the underlying motivations, and the broader goals, to see the impact that you want for the project. Remember, this is kind of really pushing that thinking that there is a project, there's a clear end. What happens after that? Because what is the impact that once this project is done? And this is another slide from previous years, because this is probably many of you know this, because somebody wrote a couple of years ago, and I think this is great. And they wrote that this reminds me, the tool and the thinking, reminds me of how golf professionals play. They think from where they want to hit the last stroke and where they need to be one stroke earlier, and so forth, until you know where you need to aim your first shot. So that was exactly kind of the point of the exercise, that we go way into the future and start a discussion that do we actually understand what's the long-term impact here? And then just like this golf example, we go backtrack one by one by one, and now we know what's the first step we need to take. And as a side product, you kind of get this story, this kind of narrative, this explanation or logic that, hey, that's why we do this, and after that we do that, and then we do this, and in the long term, this is what we're trying to achieve. A few of you pointed out that the world is much more complex than this, which is true. But I think the idea is that, and I'm going to come back to that today, that you probably need to clarify the complexity somehow. And the world will change, and you cannot predict what will happen in 6 months or 12 months. But if you really want to plan things well, then you can say that, okay, this is at least the logic that we're planning here. We're planning that once the project ends, then probably this will happen, then probably this will happen. You will not know, but this is what you're aiming at. The other thing that I really wanted to point out, that many of you, it was maybe not so clear what's the difference between the desired impact and the actual outputs or actions of the project they're doing. So for example, these are not from your exercises, it's just hypothetical. After a year, the design impact is updatable so that the new content can be applied. Yeah, but what is the desired impact of having an updatable website? So that's kind of like you're planning that, we need to do this action in the future, which is good. But that's kind of like, can you push yourself to think more like an impact and less like these are the actions to be done? The other example, in the future, collect lessons learned, collect feedback, document what happened. Again, that's a list of actions. That is not the desired impact you probably want from this project. Because otherwise you would mean that the desired impact is to collect feedback or document what happened. I'm not sure. But the point being, and I'm sure many of you can distinguish between these two. What's the difference between an impact and output? Many times in the English language, it's the difference between outputs and outcomes. Impacts, outcomes. In Finnish, we talk about vaikutukset, vaikuttavuus. So those are the kind of the more qualitative things. And then we have the more concrete things, the outputs that, we build or do or actions. And even if you know quite well the distinction between these two, are you sure the other people do? Maybe you find yourself communicating to people and for them, they think outputs and you think impacts. And this will probably cause a lot of concerns. So I have a silly example here. That's silly. No, I'll take that back. This is a good example. So for example, so those of you who are students here at Aalto, maybe you have this project writing your master's thesis, okay? The output of the project is the thesis. Maybe it's a PDF file. It is the thesis. The desired impact immediately after the project might be you graduate. So you create the output, and this output has the impact that you graduate. Fine. And now you start asking kind of questions like, okay, but what about like 6 months after I have delivered the thesis? What's the desired impact? When you go like, well, maybe it is that you are employed, you got a job. Then what about the desired impact after 1 year? Well, maybe it could be something like, actually, if I'm employed, maybe this thesis helps me to get work that is really interesting to me. It is something I know about. And once you answer those questions about the desired impacts, then actually you can see that, okay, now I have a broader context. I have this kind of logic and rationale. Why am I doing this thesis? You're not just doing this thesis to create the output, but the output actually enables some impacts in the long term. And I think that's pretty much one of the key thinking nowadays to go. Any comments on that, Jari? Sorry to call you out cold, but I
I
know
think
you've
this is
been
very, very,
thinking about that a lot. Yeah.
yeah, sorry. I think this is a very, very important clarification that we really start thinking that what's the really the impact and desired state and that this is just a mean to get there. And so I think you clarified that very, very nicely.
Yeah, thanks. And now we're going to go to the clarifying exercises, just like Jari, you said. And we have done now 2 out of the 3 that we have here. So remember the onion, the first 2 weeks ago. Then this previous week, we had the temporal project, which was really to the impact. That was the key word. And just one more thing before going further, just noting that these are facilitation tools. These are tools for you and the others to start spotting that, hey, this is actually difficult for us. Or maybe you make the observation that our project is actually very complex. Or maybe you make the observation that, hey, whose perspective are we talking about? And that might be the most valuable thing coming out. And then, of course, when you do these exercises, can you spot the difference between facilitating an answer from the other person and then coming up with an answer? And those are 2 different things. Of course they are. So just a spoiler alert, the 3rd exercise this week is going to be about success criteria for change. And here we use this, probably very familiar to some of them or many of you, a DUM model, which is just 4 words. If you want to have really good success criteria, they should be doable, understandable, measurable, and beneficial. And truth to be told, if you think about, and those of you who have a lot of experience, it actually might be very difficult to clarify your goals to be doable, understandable, measurable, and beneficial. But the process is actually the value here. That even if you try and have those dialogues and communication with other people, it will be beneficial even if you don't kind of get the perfect clarified goal. Some people like SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. But we are in the school of dumb. So that's what we're asking you to do this week. A few words about that, and this is kind of a segue to the themes of this week, is that goals are important. Everybody knows this. How do we do and get work done if we don't have any goals? Then we know that communication is important. If you have more than one person working in a team, you should probably communicate. And the 3rd point, communicating goals is very important. I think this is all just obvious and given. But somehow this is very, very difficult in practice because we get often very ambiguous goals, unclear goals. And the most problem is that it's not clear if you have achieved that goal. So here on the left, I have a couple of examples. You might say our goal is more productive work. Or our goal is that IT skills and the legal department, legal understanding improve among the workforce. UX drives the impact. That's our goal. The problem is that you can start asking very tough and good questions. More productive work. For whom? What do you mean by productive? Or let's say our goal is open communication culture. Or what do you mean? Are we a closed culture now? What actually needs to change to be more open communication culture? So these are just, I think, typical examples. I mean, feel free to write a couple more if you want into the chat. That we have these goals, but you really just cannot get any grasp on them. They're very ambiguous. But the point, the simplicity is that if you have dumb goals, then one of the key things is that a good goal, you know whether it has happened or not. 200 new customers by June. 150 did not happen. 205, yes, it happened. Funding proposal accepted. Was it accepted? Yes. It was not accepted. That's pretty clear. No. Thesis submitted. It either is submitted or it is not submitted. So kind of the simplicity is to try to achieve this level of clarity. And many of you will write next week that, okay, sometimes it is very difficult. And sometimes it might be even impossible to have this kind of clarity. But the point being that you should drive and try to get this clarity, because the conversation helps you understand what is the actual point here. And there, I think, other reasons kind of why we seldom actually work on the goals. It's so very easy not to clarify goals. I give you 7 popular excuses. You can use these as well if you want. Why not clarify the goals? It's so complex. It's difficult. It's the boss's job, not your job. Maybe. You can't put a number on it. I will not clarify the goal because this is not a numeric thing. Nobody has to do it. Maybe that's a good excuse not to do it. But I think the root cause here is that we collectively as knowledge workers, I would say, we think that writing goals and making goals is easy. Let's just write this goal over here. But no, it's not. It is not easy. Clarifying goals is actually difficult. And just remember, looking at the exercises, and in my experience, just the distinguishing between impacts and outputs, that's even difficult. That's not quite clear that everybody understands the distinction. And it goes into this, what are these goals? What are our objectives? Is it really clear? But this dumb being, I think, a really, really good and simple tool, again, is really good because it helps you to start asking dumb questions. Well, somebody says that this is our objective. You go like, how will you know if we have been successful? Or what needs to have happened in 6 months for you to be happy? Explain this to me. Or how will you know that if that has happened? Or how do we know if that has not happened? And somebody says, we need 10 more, we need more customers. Does it mean that one more customer is enough? How many more customers and stuff like that? So playing dumb, like I put it there, that is facilitation. And I would go as far as saying that's pretty much leadership nowadays as well, that you go and ask stupid questions. Kind of like, I don't understand. Explain to me, why is this important? Explain to me, how will you know if this is going to happen? Explain to me, how is this beneficial for the larger context? So here's another very simple example, but kind of putting into a narrative of how playing dumb with champagne. So let's say that, I am a boss, you are my team. And I've gone to Alko here in Finland and I got a bottle of champagne. It's very, very expensive. I'm going to tell you that, hey, we can drink this champagne in 1 month if we have been successful as a team. And everybody goes like, yeah. And now actually we can kind of, okay, what is the criteria that we drink this champagne in early June in 1 month? What should we write on the fridge floor? We can open this on 6th of June if, and then bullet points. And I mean, that's kind of just an example that you can make it kind of playful. It doesn't have to be official project language, but that's the whole point. What we as a team think that we should have in 1 month. What's the impact? What are the goals? What are the objectives? And then start asking questions. Oh, is it doable? Is this something we can do in 1 month? Does everybody here understand what it says on the fridge now? Does everybody understand these objectives and goals? Because we want you to get this done. That's why we get the champagne. Are these goals something we can actually measure? That when it is June the 6th, we can go like, yes, 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 and not something vague and ambiguous. And last, how does it benefit us? I mean, You don't, you can put like silly goals, the sun rises in the morning. Yeah, we can drink the champagne, but that's probably not benefiting your project. So how can it be beneficial as well? So the third exercise, as you can see, it is really to clarify the success criteria. So we know the organizational context. We kind of know now the impacts we want. How do we actually write down goals and objectives and success criteria for that change to happen? And this is, of course, where the leadership, facilitation, mentoring, sparring, everything comes in. You can start asking, okay, what is the context? What are you trying to achieve here? How do we know if you have achieved it? Facilitating, sparring, leadership questions. And you could even think that this becomes like one continuous goal clarification exercise. That here in the left, let's say that you are running an organization culture transformation and you have very ambiguous, vague objectives. Then you start drawing the onion, and then you get the contextual objectives. Then you do something like last week, the timeline, and then you get these impacts, and now your objectives are impactful. And then you do the third exercise, the criteria for champagne, and now you suddenly have these dumb objectives, doable, understood, measurable, beneficial. And it's kind of simple, like as simple as that. And of course, at each stage, you're facilitating. You're asking, listening, you're drawing, doing what you have now done in the previous two exercises are going to do next week in the third one. How do you help others to come up with really dumb objectives? It actually kind of works for any project. They probably have ambiguous objectives in the beginning, clarify the context, clarify the impacts, and then make them dumb. Relatively easy, isn't it? Then one last point before we go to the themes of today, just emphasizing this clarification, simplification that we're pushing you with. But it's more than a gimmick. And kind of the obvious reasons is nowadays is the AI, the artificial intelligence and everything that's going on. Because as knowledge workers, we have so many levels of abstraction now. We need somebody to help, or we need to, what is the relevant level for different audiences? Something that you have done in the exercises. Kind of, what do I tell this other person? What's the relevant level? And then automation doesn't take away complexity. It actually adds complexity, doesn't it? Because if it is a simple thing, then it will be automated, and all the complex stuff is left for us humans. Then the third point, that the more and more we automate our knowledge work, the more and more we find our colleagues, human colleagues, to have very different backgrounds. And now you need to kind of a shared language, you need to simplify, you need to focus, and in the communication between the people, that what actually matters and is meaning. And then the fourth point, of course, is that now we got all the AIs and data and access to many, many places as knowledge workers. What is the correct context? A question that keeps on popping up from your exercise is that, hey, what is the context of this tool? And once you get the context, you can see that so it's actually this kind of context understanding exercise becomes important. So we need more summaries, synthesis, grouping. We need shared frameworks that we at the workplace or our colleagues, checklists, templates that we, for having those discussions, having those dialogues. Just like these exercises we have made you do. They are like shared little tools for the conversations, which are the valuable stuff. Okay, let's take a breather. Oh no, I don't have a coffee cup here. I just need to take a breather. So, sorry if I'm going really fast, but we just had a breather. Here's where we are at this course, okay? We got to make organization responsive to remain competitive. Remember lecture 1. There's a fog of uncertainty. Yeah, that's a given. We have various lenses. There's no single truth. And then we change by doing. We change by changing people's behavior, not their thinking. Great. That's what previous 2 lectures. And this is what we have. We have a vision, some kind of a new culture. We talked about this. We got maybe a rough change program. Remember from last time, the 6 foundation stones. We got the context of our work. We got the impacts of our work. And now this week, we're going to get some measurable goals. So Remember, uncertainty, can't plan it, have to build a responsive culture. Culture is doing is routines and tools, Aha! Now we're getting to the theme of today. Lean startup, agile, design. And remember from the first lecture, as kind of point being, that this is part of the reason why these have been so popular in the past almost 20 years. I think 20 years. That these tools, and these are slightly more complex than the ones we are using, but they actually bring a mindset, a way of working. And remember from lecture 1, these are the kind of the medicine for the uncertainty. If you do not know what is the content of your work, then actually you can take these tools and you kind of start at least know how you go forward. What is the uncertainty? So if you remember this kind of chart, that in the uncertainty, this is what I just said before, but in a visual format, that you have the responsive culture, the culture of doing routines and practices. And that's why these little things like tools and templates or roadmaps or rules or principles and, workshops and items on the wall do actually matter, because you are aligning people's behaviors. And once they behave more or less similarly, they start thinking collectively the same way. And that's how you build the autonomous and shared culture. And that is your competitive advantage. So, of course, that begs the question, where do you start? And this is a typical question I've had as a trainer and a consultant in the past 15 years, is that, okay, which one? Which of this medicine should I take? Should I take design? Should I take agile? Should I take lean and all of this? What is the right one out of these? And if we go quickly over each one of them, just to remind you where they come from, or if you haven't heard, then you kind of quick crash course. So agile comes very much from software engineering. I think this late 1990s. So the point being that they got together, so few software engineers, and made this manifesto that this is how we want to do work. And this kind of is a very agile way of doing. And they're highlighting interactions and individuals, that working software, customer collaboration. And the fourth one, that it's always more important to respond to change than following a plan. And that's pretty much where the word agile has been grounded in the past 20-something years. Then we got the lean. They like to build houses, as you can see, which goes way back to Toyota, 1970s all the way. You can see the top here, situational approach. Again, that's the different wording for what we have been talking about, the contextual approach, that there is no truth, that you are kind of based on the situation and you should understand the current situation. Capability development, you're kind of developing your capabilities as you go. Here at the bottom is basic thinking, mindset, assumptions, that you, among others, have the same thinking, same basics, same foundations. Here's another house that nicely shows the kind of the continuous learning, that you do things and then you learn. Action, reflection. And then you kind of build this learning organization as you go. We got 6 Sigma leans. I think there's more than 6 nowadays, kind of looking at where are the wastes and this kind of that ways of doing. Got the lean startup, thinking about build, measure, learn. How do we kind of thinking and doing that, we build something, we measure how it actually works, and then we learn from it, and then we build again, and then we make this cycle really fast. We got the good old design thinking. Here I just took the double diamond, where we start from somewhere, then we kind of open things and we diverge and look for different options, but we're quite aware that, sooner or later we need to converge into something, an output maybe, something concrete. But it doesn't stop there. Once we have done it, have converged on something, made a solution, made a decision, then we are open again. But we know that we're going to converge again into something concrete and need to make a decision. So all of these kind of, bringing you, these are the different schools of, ways of working into uncertainty. Like I said, the medicine for uncertainty. That if you do not know as an organization what to do, these templates, these medicine, these tools, these philosophies will help you figure out what to do, what actions to take. And like, just my brief introduction told you, they have different histories and they have different things they emphasize. But fortunately, we have this book. There's the reference in the middle. I think you can find this online for free. So this is John Schneider's book on all the way from 2015. He talks about, these, where do these come from? What are the good things about each of these ways of doing things? Design thinking, lean mindset, and agile. But actually, the interesting thing is his second picture, that if we take all of these medicine at the same time, that, why choose one? Remember when I asked the question that, okay, which one is the best if you want, or which one suits our the most? What if we just take them all? What does it look like? Then his take, I think, is a really nice picture. You can see that these have this medicine, if you will, they have kind of different advantages, If you need to explore problems and find new opportunities, then you are more, take the design vitamins. If your problem is that you need to align people to a purpose, then the lean mindset is really good. Or if you are, need evolutionary design, then you take partly agile combined with design thinking. Or I like the one in the middle, that if you kind of need to define a strategy that is very actionable, then you have partly kind of lean thinking and partly design thinking, or both. But my take on this for today is this, that if you take all this medicine at the same time, agile, lean startup, design thinking, what does it mean for leadership? You, either as a facilitator or a formal leader, what does it mean? And in the Johnny Schneider book, he says that, as a leader, if you need to form a vision, these medicine will help you, explore problems and come up with solutions. If you need to create a strategy, this medicine will help you set an actionable course. For solution delivery, it will help you adapt to changes as you go. And then for the organization, which is kind of the main focus of this course, it will help people understand that learning and doing go hand in hand. You align people to a purpose, that everybody gets to the same direction. And then interestingly, value-based portfolio thinking, which means that you kind of have the value story of what is actually the value we want to create. And you zoom out and look at kind of the portfolio of actions and activities to do. And here's a good example, and I have the link for this. I think this is still freely available, at least here in Finland, in Yle Areena. Then you can go and look at Jeff Gothelf's talk that, if you take all this medicine together, these are his kind of 10 principles that work with any methodology. Otherwise, he's saying, follow these principles kind of whatever you're doing, and you can drive into the fog and you survive in the uncertainty. But before the break, I want to take you one step further with this thinking. So intentionally, I presented these as medicine. And we can say, just roughly speaking, in the past 10, 15 years, a lot of organizations have taken this medicine. The organizations every Monday, they got this organizational headache, uncertainty, or, we are not having innovations, or, our people are, wasting their time, so we don't have meaningful jobs. And then they take this medicine. Let's do some design thinking. But I think that at some stage, if you take headache medicine every Monday, you probably need to figure out that what's actually the root cause for those headaches. Why are organizations taking these medicine in the past decade or so? So what's really kind of behind all those principles, tools, approaches, and philosophies? What is the question they're answering? And this is my professional opinion, that if you really look at all of those different schools, and I'm sure they're in the audience, there are many of you who are quite familiar with one or many of them. And those are the two questions are, what is valuable work? Put yourself into the shoes of an employer. How do they know what is valuable work? And how do they know what is valued in general? Those are the two questions that all of these philosophies really help people to answer. And sure, I put in the bullet points, there's lots and lots about teamwork, lots and lots about working in uncertainty and not to get it fixed on a solution. But to really try to convince you is this, that, last, 10 years, everybody's talking about the word value, maybe for a good reason. Maybe this is another symptom of the headache. We want stuff that is value driven. We want to reduce waste and create value. We want to be valuable to our customers. We don't necessarily it's not about money or profits, but it is about value. We need to deliver value. But how do we know? How do we know in our work context what is valuable? In my own context or in my team's current context, how do I know what is valuable and what isn't? So maybe the solution is that the CEO or the big boss just tells us that, hey, this is value for us is this. The main logic for our 1,000-person company for creating value is this. Yeah, but not quite. Because remember, one of the big things we're talking about is contextuality. But things are contextual, situational. There is no single truth. So maybe for the whole company, this kind of value is the thing, but how do you apply it into your project, into your team? And I think this first question, I think both of these questions are actually very intuitive. So the first question, I'm sure you have encountered, questions like these. Which task is most important? I come to work every Monday. I got all these tasks to do. How do I know which one to start with? Or maybe somebody's asking, why are we doing this? Why do we have this project? Or why do we doing this all together? Maybe you are thinking, okay, maybe I'm wasting time here. I do not really understand. Is this valuable what I'm asked to do? What is expected of me as an employer, as a leader, as a worker? Maybe you think that this is actually really important for the organization. But do others think that this is valuable work? How do you know? Where do you know this? And sometimes when I run workshops with this, I actually go over and ask people that in your workplace, where do people get the answer to this question? Then you have the other question, remember, what is valued in general? So if the first one is really about what should I do? Then these are the kind of questions that I'm sure you're familiar with as well. Can I say that to the boss? What kind of jokes can I say in this workplace? How much they appreciate ambition here? Can I be much more ambitious than anyone? Is that valued in general? Maybe, you go like, looks like nobody's, rewarded for initiative. Is that, valued in general here? Can I be critical? Everybody always says, oh, you can be critical, but can I really be critical? Is that valued in general? What if I fail? What if I take risk and fail? Is risk-taking valued in general? And really to hammer in that these are two different questions. So here's my example that, maybe working late at the office is valued in general. But of course, it can be valuable work or totally non-valuable work. It's valued in general, but it doesn't tell whether you should be doing that work or not. The same, being proactive or future-oriented, that's valued in general. But it gives you absolutely, does not answer the question, is this valuable work that I'm doing? That's more like general thing. So can you kind of spot the difference between valuable work and valued in general? And typically people think the valued in general, that's kind of the culture thing, the kind of ambiguous, foggy thing about culture. I mean, that's partly it. But I think the actual work and the valuable work is a key part of the culture as well. But typically it kind of helps to understand organizations when you kind of distinguish these two. And then, of course, remember my main point that the medicine seems to help organizations answer these questions, which means that many contemporary organizations have problems answering these questions in the knowledge work world we live in. It looks like these, if you can answer these questions collectively, you're fine. Here's just a reference from an article I found. And I think maybe this sheds some light. For example, in emergency situations, employees don't want to have to wait permission from the boss to respond. They need to have a general understanding of how things are done here. What is valuable work? What is valued in general? Couple more slides. And maybe this really does, this is heavy stuff I know I'm telling. It is actually at the same time very simple, just two very simple questions that anybody understands, but kind of they are the very tip of an iceberg of a big, big issue I'm trying to make, an argument. That in the contemporary organization, if you want to change them, the key is to start helping people answer the question of what's valuable work and what's valued in general. And the word value really muddies the waters. Because typically when you start, hey, let's talk about values, you go on a different tangent. Well, democracy is a value. Yes, that's very important. Situation about democracy. Yeah, that's an important discussion, but is that really the discussion we want to talk about? Ethics, morality, societal values. So I put this slide here is kind of if you want to really understand how well your workplace or your team is answering these questions. Don't ask, what are the values? You will get the official school book answers. Well, the values of our company are courage, holding hands, smiling every Monday. Sure, but ask the question, what is considered valuable? Hey, what is considered valuable in our team? Hey, we got this new employee coming in. Can you tell, what do we think is valuable in our team? Well, we think it's valuable to do this and all that. And that's where you start having a good conversation of how people work, how they behave, what are the actions that are considered valuable. And then we get into the work culture. And one more thing before the break. You might be wondering, I don't know, why am I ranting so much about this value thing? And the point is this, that it all boils down. This is my thesis for the first half of the lecture. This all boils down, like I said, how people know in a work organization what is valuable work and what is valued in general. And this is the bridge to the discussion that, okay, if we want that, remember that picture? We want these work organizations that are autonomous. People lead themselves. People have meaningful work. People think strategically wherever they are in the organization. And they do all this stuff collectively. We do not want an organization that is a bunch of individuals. We want a collective organization that does stuff together. So that's the word collective. And the point is that none of these things work. None of these dreams, autonomy, self-leadership, and so forth, they do not work unless people can answer these two fundamental questions. And the better they can answer these questions, what's valuable work, what's valued in general, then that is the source for more resilience, more responsiveness, more flexibility, more strategic alignment in a contemporary organization. So it really looks like the contemporary remedies, all the design, agile, lean, all of that tell us that the headache is that people need to know what to prioritize. You need to help people understand what is valuable and what isn't. And this, of course, resonates with the kind of the new cultures thinking we were having. Remember this John Shook diagram, that we change cultures by what people do. And this is kind of the point where we go and do the change. People need to know what to prioritize. And once they know what we do, then we both kind of start doing the right thing and building the right kind of culture. So, what does value mean in different organizations? Of course, like I said, it's contextual, it's situational, no ready answers. We can only create shared meanings. But that's after the break. 5-minute break, don't go far. We continue 5 past. value, value, value. That was pretty much the last 15 years. Everybody should generate value, customer value, business value, whatever value, maybe even societal value. But how do you get people to, align behind the same values? I mean, if you're more than, I don't know, more than two people, then you actually have this challenge that how are we sure that we understand the word value in the same way, that actually what is valuable work and then what is valued in general? And the answer is share the same meanings. But what does this mean? But first of all, just remember that numbers are great. If you need to align people towards a shared goal, towards a shared value, just put a number. Numbers are unambiguous. If I'm your boss and I tell you we need 15, last month it was 14, this month we need 15. Everybody understands it. 15 is 15. It's not 16, it's 15. They're easy to communicate, takes you 10 seconds. This month's goal, 15. Easy to focus on the same target. You could be 10,000 people and I could tell you it's 15, and 10,000 people would focus on the target being 15. We love numbers. That's how we work as humanity. However, the challenge is that you really shouldn't quantify everything into a number. So here on the left, I have stuff that typically organizations nowadays want people to achieve. Let's put it that way. Or these are the kind of the things that they consider valuable: commitment, empathy, trustworthiness, innovative, sustainability, growth. You can't give a number, can you? Sustainability, what number? What 3? What does it mean? No, these are much qualitative, much more complex things that you just shouldn't put. Of course you can, but I'm saying you shouldn't force them into numbers. And then the thing about these words, such as here on the left-hand side, they can't be your meanings as such either. You just cannot take, let's say, empathy, bring it into your workplace and say, now our core value is empathy. Because that word will be understood in very many different ways. Remember those lenses and perspectives. So somebody, probably you, need to facilitate these meanings. First to yourself, what do I mean by empathy? And then to others, hey guys, what do we mean by empathy? So thankfully, there is a very simple model that I have been using quite a long time, and it's based on social sciences and how we as human beings actually create shared meanings. So this is from Etienne Wenger's relatively well-known social scientist, his book From Communities of Practice. It's a thick book, worth reading. And he presents this model based on his studies. So he actually studied this large open space, this call center for an American insurance company. And he tried to figure out, how do these people, these hundreds of people working for the call center, how do they cooperate and generate meanings? And he called them kind of negotiating. How do these people negotiate shared meanings so that they can work together? And he came up with this very simple model, but it has 2 parts. I'm going to go them through very soon. The other part is participation, and then there's the reification, and they come as a pair. And I changed the model has the word negotiation in the middle. I change it into facilitation. And here we go. The participation part, again, very intuitive. And that's why I like this model. This is just like the picture shows you. This is like workshopping. We talk with our colleagues and figure out that, hey, together, what is our main customer group? What do we understand what we mean when we say main customer group? And then people raise their hands and give their opinions and their perspectives, and all the different lenses are there. And we put post-its on a wall, and then if it's a good workshop at the end of the way, like, hey, it looks like, this is what we mean when we say main customer group. And then the other part was the reification. And this comes from Latin word thing. So reification literally means taking abstract stuff and making them concrete. And this is actually very intuitive as well, because this is what we do at workplaces. We create documents, the discussions we had, I'll write the document. So I'm making it concrete. I'm reifying it. We make plans, we make roadmaps, abstract things, conversations, vague stuff put into concrete things. videos, tools, emails, reports, posters, press releases, contracts. Work contract is a good example. It's a very vague thing, very abstract thing that I make an agreement with you to work here, but then we make this reification, a contract that we can all see that what did we actually agree. And the Wenger's model's point is that they come as a pair. You should have them both. And it's kind of like yin and yang. It just goes on and on. Once you create one, you should create the next one. And that enables the next one, which enables the next one. And the other point is that if you want those, you should have them in balance as well. If you just do too much participation, if you're just workshopping these words, you're having conversations, having dialogues, but no reification. Nobody's writing these down. Nobody's making these the official things for our organization. Then there's no documents. There's no coordination. There's no scaling up. There's no anchoring these things. We're just endless discussions that actually lead probably nowhere. So we need reification. So my example is like a workshop without any documentations. But then again, I think we're all very familiar that if it's the opposite, that we don't have any participation, we just have reification. We have that the big boss just sends, these are the company values, this is the strategy, these are the OKRs, these are the KPIs. So if there's no discussion, if there's no dialogue, if there's no participation, difficult to get commitment, no ownership, there's no diversity because it's just this one. There's no room for critique, interaction, and no feedback as well. So this is kind of the old school top-down orders where you just obey and you don't really quite understand why this is going on, but you just do what you're told. So the point being that they need to kind of be in balance. And as you kind of guess, we need somebody there to make sure that they both happen and they are in balance. So the point from this model is that we take all these principles, whether it's some like empathy, we can take that, or we can take a tool, just like the one that we'll be using in this course, or let's say a business model canvas. We can take all these things from the world, absolutely, and bring them to the workplace. But they can't be our meanings as such. Somebody needs to start kind of having this discussion. What does this mean for us? How do we contextualize this? How do we make this personal? How do we make this local, if you want? So we need people who kind of do the reification, people who do the participation. So if I put it into pictures, on the left-hand side, we need people who are like librarians, that they curate the reifications. They kind of, well, I have all the documents from the workshop, I have all the official meanings of what's our customer group. And typically that's a kind of a change agent job. But of course, on the other hand, we need those change agents also to have those participations. Who is making sure that we get all the different diversity, different lenses, different opinions, which also create the commitment, ownership, all of the good stuff from the participation. And I think this is also a leadership question. We need leaders who do the reifications, and we need the same leaders to do the participation. Or at least we need somebody to do this. Otherwise, we don't have the shared meanings. And I have this example. I have now 2 years work with Volvo Group, which is the large company, international company doing the trucks and ship engines and construction equipment and so forth. These are their leadership principles. And here in the left, you can see one of the 3 is clarify and align. So definitely it's all about that. For them, they want to teach all their, hundreds or thousands of leaders in the global organization. It's a key skill that they can clarify the goals, what are we doing and why, and how do they align the people behind those same goals and objectives. Good. Okay, I'm a bit early again. Jaakko, are you ready for the breakout rooms? Meanwhile, Jari, do you want to say something as magically I have extra time?
Well, I think you're quite magically in fire today, so hard to interrupt. But I really would like to emphasize the this meaning making and really taking care of the words. And while we're using the words and give meanings to the words, that there are these differences in how we interpret, and we take those words quite take as granted, taken to granted in a way that asking about words as well, and stopping with those when we are really having this participation negotiation part, and I think that's one issue here behind, because our words tend to be very abstract, and we use very abstract language while we are doing our stuff in organization, and so that's quite often our trap as well.
And I think it's many times noticed myself as well. We kind of easily might get even angry if somebody doesn't understand these words the same way as we do. And I think it's just maybe the presumption that, if I say empathy, everybody knows what empathy means, but when maybe they understand the same way, but maybe the context is different. They're thinking about a different context, and then we're just just wasting energy arguing what is the right definition if the context is different.
Yes, and I think the language is very contextual, and actually meanings are contextual, and so empathy can be in a neighboring team. They can interpret it a little bit differently, and remembering really that is that it's also hard to transfer the meanings as such. You just create them again in a new context. So it's telling and retelling, and so that's why this meaning making is really a key. And we neglect that quite often. We take that as kind of self-evident. We talked that once already, so everybody knows. But I think that's the patience and tolerance that we have to renew our meanings as well, and refresh them.
And I think that's kind of the classical thing we all know, that when you have worked with people for a long time, some things just happen magically. And I think it's partly because we share the same meanings.
Yeah.
The classic example of, being married to somebody for ages, you finish each other's sentences. That's like a perfect example that you have shared meanings. Or maybe not. I don't know. Okay, time for you to get into the breakout rooms. So before I tell you the task, I'm going to tell you the method. So we're going to ask you to think alone for 2 minutes, and before you go to the breakout room. And then we go to the breakout rooms, and then for roughly 10 minutes, share your thoughts. And just remember, make it a good learning space. Everybody has time to talk. Not everybody has to talk, but, talk something. Turn on the cameras, please. That helps a lot. Appreciate variety of experiences. Here's the task. So first alone, think of a familiar context for you. Work context, but if you're not working, then, if you're a student, maybe it's like study context, maybe it's your hobby context, something where you are part of an organization. What's a good context that makes the team work together? Think of a familiar context where, you have got teamwork. Teamwork is working really good. You get the teamwork done. So what I'm trying to say here is that, think about, let's take a student example, that you were in this course where you had this team and everything worked really smoothly. What was about the context that actually made this happen? What is the required context for a successful workshop, for example? Or, what do you need for managing a product or business? And once you have kind of this context and this team in your mind, then we put you into the breakout rooms. And the question in the breakout room is that what meanings you probably have to negotiate in that, work context. If you're thinking about your hobby, I don't know, you're coaching 10-year-old kids to play football, what are the key meanings that every 10-year-old footballer has to understand for the team to work? But let's start like now, 2 minutes. Think about an example or some familiar context that you can start answering the second question. What meanings you probably have to negotiate with the other people? Understanding what they are aiming at, shared goal, common understanding of how to do things. Yeah, so probably good examples. What do you need to negotiate? Yeah. Anything more? Stop to see results during the journey. Important to have a clear task. Yeah, and I think it's, sounds obvious, but I think it's good to say aloud. Once we get together, have we all understood? Do we have a shared meaning of why we are here? What are we doing? And why does this company exist? Uh, Remember way back when we had COVID and everything went into crazy mode? Those were probably the questions that good leaders were asking. Hey, let's just look. Why are we here? What's the reason of our existence? And based on that, what should we do now? We need to share the same language and timelines, objectives, tools. Yeah, that's a good list. But remember, those are those as well, timelines, objectives. Those are the things that you need to have a shared meaning on. What is our objective? What is our timeline? They are not separate from the language. I guess that's what I'm saying. Jari, are you picking up anything interesting?
Yeah, I guess there's very, very relevant stuff, and so I like really much this reminding us that we make a lot of assumptions about others and their views, and so I think this very core question: why are we doing this, and what we are aiming, and in a way asking sometimes again, and also then reflecting on that how did it go? So giving meanings afterwards as well, and not just before, and so this is kind of keeping up to meanings and understanding alive while they are also changing in this kind of change process and change work, and so that's why also this reflection, not just planning ahead, but really taking a look how did it go, and so I think that's very important as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I don't think I emphasized. It's kind of that we can look retrospectively and also, in hindsight, we
Yeah,
can give shared meanings into
because
things that
it
happened.
also that those meanings which we have at first, then our
Mm.
understanding develops, and then afterwards we they are changed, and so repeating and how we understand this, what's our view now, and so I think that's quite pivotal as well.
Yeah. It reminds me of Julius Caesar about 2000 years ago, that when he did his when he did his battles in Gallia in France, he wrote the history of it. So he he literally made the meanings himself. That what did Julius Caesar do and why is he an awesome guy? Yeah, that's an old way of
Yeah,
meaning making. In hindsight, yeah, hasn't gone away, has it?
yeah.
Let's maybe pick one or two. Yeah, I'm just picking here. Annika is writing, even in experienced teams, purpose cannot be assumed. I think that's echoing what Jari just said. Uh, One may have facilitated numerous dailies, yet it remains essential to continuously reinforce their meaning and value. Yeah. And I guess the reason is a very human, or not a human, but natural thing, is that because the context changes. We even think that why are we doing this over and over again? But do we really actually realize that maybe, the context has changed?
Mm.
And that's why actually we are not crossing the same river twice, as they say proverbially. Yeah.
And I guess one important point is that what Marco wrote here, what a team means, meaning that people who are, we suppose that we are a team and everybody is in relation to the team in the same way, but that's never quite true, that we have a similar relation to the team. And then there is maybe the core, and then there is maybe some who are coming from other organizations and so on. So also there's this meaning of what does this team means us, that is collective where we are working. So that could be also very important sometimes, that how we get us together in a way, and that there's a fair ways to be together, and even if they are different, and so that's something that's
Yeah.
also good to remember.
I'm kind of hoping as well that this model that just have an exercise in your team or organizations like this. If you can only choose 3 words that everybody needs to understand the same way, what would they be? And it's kind of as an exercise, because, oh, we should have a shared language and, we should have share this, let's wear the same, t-shirts, everybody, which is great. But I mean, prioritization, if you had to choose only 3 things that everybody shares the meanings, what would they be and why? Good. Here's a next slide.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just admire how far you got in 10 minutes in strange groups or groups with this kind of never spoken before and very good lists.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was great. Thanks for that.
And here's another group of people. This is actually way back. This was just before COVID, so that's quite a long time ago. I was running a workshop with Finnish leaders from companies and organizations and scholars as well. I think, Jari, you might have been here as well. And they we did a little booklet about it. And I think it was really interesting to see that what meanings the leaders thought that they need to curate in their organizations. What are the key things that they want people to have more or less the same shared meaning? So change, it's kind of obvious, but yeah, if that's the one word that everybody understands more or less the same way, yeah, that's actually very beneficial. What is considered work nowadays? Knowledge work, AI, what is work? Lifelong learning, that's a big theme that's going on. Who's responsible for this? Do we understand that? Do we share meanings on it? And we got the value, what is valued, that actually came from those exercises. Meta skills required. Jari, you're going to talk about meta skills later in this course.
Yeah.
And, having a negotiation, we have these skills. What are the other skills required nowadays in the uncertainty, in the changes that we're living in? My last one is my favorite. What are the silos and borders? What are the boundaries that we want? What are the shared meanings for the boundaries we want? Because we always think about, oh, let's take away the silos and, let's just go openly. No, hell no. That would be a terrible workplace where you have no boundaries. We'll come back to that later, maybe.
But actually, this is how we negotiate the boundaries. And what are those? Because there are multiple different boundaries, but they are needed, but they are also in a way negotiable in a way, more strict and more are, let's say, negotiated, and so that's also meaning making, which is important.
Yeah, and I think that the word boundaries is maybe or the concept of boundaries is underused, because you can think about, let's say, strategy, KPIs, OKRs, they're all boundaries, aren't they?
Sure.
And role descriptions of the workplace, those are boundaries, and they are really good boundaries because they help you focus. They help to communicate what is valuable work, what is valued in general. So I'm a big fan of boundaries. When people want to break down silos, I'm not so sure. I'm not the first one to put the dynamite in.
It's very important also agree on what we not to do. So that but focus, and then what to not to do.
Okay, and maybe some of you actually realized that, hey, good stuff, Risto, but you never answered which one to choose: lean, agile, design, or everything. I've just been meta discussing. But here's the point, of course, is that kind of like, hey, this is how it should go. That it's not necessarily that important what to choose, but it's kind of like choose one and start working with it, Take something. So, for example, here, I think that might be the lean canvas as a tool. Just take it. Then participation, work with it, work together, see how it goes. Verification, just, kind of write down or make changes. Hey, I got this new version. Now that's a verification. I changed this tool. It's a concrete thing. And then you do participation again. And then you do another verification because you learned on it. And then you do a new participation, and it goes on and on and on and on. And that's why it is this kind of never-ending circle as well, because that's how the shared meaning making happens. It's an iterative process which has the participation part and the verification part. So you need to kind of curate and facilitate. And start with your best guess, but I mean, just like a simple question. should we take design thinking or should we take agile thinking? It's kind of like, well, don't waste too much time on this because you will need to meaning make whatever you choose anyway. And this has got the same thing, the same picture with different words, that this is what you need as a facilitator, as a leader to balance people's thinking, their behavior, their understanding on the one hand, but then you need to make these concrete as well. The reification, the tools, object, organization structures, decision-making models. But it doesn't end there. Then you give these tools and structures to the people, and then that changes, and then you learn from that, and that changes, and then that's why they come as a pair. So if I put it into the last week's exercise, which do I choose? Design, agile, lean, or lean startup. So let's say here is your project, your organization change program. Then you would start kind of, in the long term. What has happened 1 year after your change project ended? What has happened? What's the desired impact after 1 year? What is the change and what does it look like after 1 year? And then remember, just like that golf player, from that final stroke, you go backpedaling. Okay, what does it mean after 6 months? What about after 1 month we have done this project? What do we need to have here when we end the project so that we actually reach the 1 month impact, 6 month, and 12 month? And then, of course, going back, looking at the history. Where do we come from? Are we an engineering company? So maybe a more, technical approach like lean or, agile fits better our culture. People have experience with these tools, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're a different kind of company and it looks like it makes sense to start with this or this. And now you can have a very good educated answer on what school of thought should you start with, design, agile, or lean. What is the long-term impact? Going back from that, and then looking at the history. Where do we come from? Who are these people? What would suit us better, our culture? And with that information, you can start the change project going like, yeah, this is the philosophy we take. This is the philosophy we're going to start adapting and using. Time for wrapping things up. So exercise number 3, the champagne criteria. Unfortunately, we will not distribute any champagne to you. If you want to buy any yourselves, we are not going to stop you. But if you buy champagne or any other sparkling beverage, remember to write down the criteria, why and how you can drink it. Okay, deadline by end of next Monday again. Here's the task. So, as you probably have guessed if you have paid any attention, you need to facilitate the success criteria for your pair's work. Again, you need to have a project. It can be the same it has been the past 2 times. And then, remember from last time, if you didn't do this, now you got to do this. You need to have the desired impacts after the project has ended. Remember, let's say that you are doing a master's thesis. Oh, thesis is done. What's the impact after 1 month? What's the impact after 3? What's the impact after 12 months? Something like that. Then the other person helps you asking dumb questions, facilitating that, okay, if I have this thesis project now, those are the impacts, what are my goals for this thesis project? What should be the objectives of this thesis project? Yeah, probably writing down a thesis, but is there something else maybe? What type of a thesis? How fast you want it? What is the grade? And, you get much more context into your objectives. And then, of course, the key thing I started with, making them measurable, really. That's difficult. So at least try to do that. Help the other person to come up with some measurable things. And beneficial as well, And for being beneficial, you need to understand the larger context, the outside context, the stakeholders, the bigger thing, and all of that. And then, as usual, you switch roles. And then you discuss, sketch, draw those pictures, put those pictures into the assignments. And again, make sure you understand what you are drawing. And that way, actually, it becomes a pair exercise. And please, still there were a few of you who did not actually reflect on the tool or the exercise. Some of you did not reflect at all. No, please do reflect. One or two of you reflected on the other person's job or work. Okay, that's nice, but actually the main thing is you reflect about the tool, and in this case, it's the dumb success criteria. Where does it work? Was it good? Would you use it? What did you learn from this? How can you apply it? Does it make sense? And so forth. And the easy way to do this is that you reserve 5 to 10 minutes. Let's say reserve 10 minutes from your pair meeting and do it together. Have the discussion and the reflection together, put it into the bullets, and then both just share that reflection in your own assignments. And that's what some of you have done, and that's perfectly fine. Good. Submission form you probably have, and that's coming in the emails. And yeah, that's it. Don't leave yet, though. A couple of more slides. That was half of the lectures, almost done. Key takeaways here for you to copy paste into your Gen AI chatbot or whatever you want to do with them. And then further readings there you can see, I'll also put into the chat the Jeff Gotthalb's talk. It is still in Yle Areena, although it's probably 10 years old now. It's good stuff. Couple of links as well. Somebody commented that some of these articles are behind a paywall. That is true. Yeah, that's true. So, for example, some of them actually might be, but not all. I try to look that some of them are publicly accessible. I have not really checked all of them. Are they still online? But I hope they are. Good. And then it is your checklist. Attendance, register. Yeah, Jaakko has put it there. You will get the Google Drive link you probably have. And like I say in the speech bubble, if you're leaving the course, let us know, because that helps with the pairing hassle a little bit. Good. Yeah, I'm 10 minutes early.
No, right.
There's something wrong with my lecturing this year.
No, it's just process improved.
Is it? More efficient? I'm not sure if efficiency is the right word here.
Yeah. But hey, next time we will take a deeper dive to facilitation as a process and as a relationship, and how to design, how to develop, what happens in a before, in the middle, and afterwards, and so how to make a facilitation as a situation successful, and then we talk about also the meta skills which are connected to this facilitation capability and mindset to be helpful, because it's a kind of helping mindset is needed. But yeah, next time it's May 13th. Yes,
it is already May 13th. Absolutely.